We had pieces that I didn't get to last week. Can I ask you a little bit about that? If you were here last week and were expecting me to do your piece, but I was not able to do your piece, could you tell me now?
Well, I was absent last week.
What's that?
I missed the last. I had a bit of confusion whether it was Wednesday or Sunday, and I ended up missing the last session, I guess.
Okay, so, and Sweta, am I saying that anywhere close to properly?
Yeah, the flaming yagna had sent for the last week actually.
For last
and you
week,
had
and
sent me the feedback also.
Okay, great. So let's start with that one. Okay, we'll start with that one, and then we'll catch up. We'll sort of do a little warm up here. It's early in the morning here, so you'll forgive me. I mean, it's 7:40. I mean, I was up at 6, and then I was involved in my world, and so it's sort of like you take me out of a, it's kind of a matrixy kind of thing, where there's a lot of slime around me, and okay. So here, this piece, right?
Yeah.
Flaming yagna. Okay, let me review a little bit.
Otis, just before you start, can I just say that I don't see my piece in the column, in the names that you have on the left side.
Okay, tell me what your piece was.
It's the Shared Roots one, Siam Reap Saunterings, that I had
sent
you 3 weeks ago.
Oh, no, Kavita, I think I saw it in bottom, Kavita.
Oh, I see that at the bottom. Okay. Now
this
I see it. Thank
here.
you. Yeah, I see it now. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for bringing that up. And then we'll do that one next. So let's return to this. Okay. Sweta, if I'm getting close to pronouncing correctly, forgive me if I'm not. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece? Tell us what's happening.
So actually, this is not for the Cambodia anthology, but based on the feedback for the Cambodia anthology, the main feedback was vis-a-vis plot and structure. So I actually went through some of the stuff that I had written and I looked for where I had done some plotting. So I submitted this piece to understand if this was sort of in the direction of good plotting, or it was just dreadful plotting, or there's no plot. So that's why I submitted this piece. But my objective really is to rework the plot for the Cambodia anthology, but I wanted feedback on this. I felt that this had some amount of plotting. So just on plot and structure, I wanted that feedback, because the first feedback that I received was that, and there was no plot and structure actually. So I had not even aspired towards that for the first piece that I'd sent in.
Okay, and I wrote separate dialogue and establish a setting. Do you want to use point of view? Is there a character story here? Some wild stuff here. Talk soon. Yes, I want to say that I like your work so far. I remember. So you had the piece about this kind of witchcraft last time, and then this piece. And I have to say that I like these worlds. They're very unusual. There's so much energy to them. I'm unclear what it might be based on, if it's based on something that's factual or mythological or simply invented by you, but it's really a fun world. I'm gonna have you read some. Maybe we'll just have you read well, we'll allow you to, let's see. Maybe it's a little bit long, but I do like this line here. Maybe you could read the first part to there. I mean, just to there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The flaming yagna. Kali urged Durga to follow the way of the mushroom fighters. The mushroom fighters were a race of Nagas who performed every ritual with mushrooms. Perform your yagna by throwing mushrooms into the Vedic fire, said Kali. Why mushrooms? Asked Durga. Mushrooms are symbols of secret power, And what we're doing is evoking the secret power that created the earth, Adi Shakti, said Kali. It was for a mushrooming wish that varied forms of Adi Shakti congregate. Together, Kali and Durga went through the mushroom fields and plucked 1008 mushrooms. Some were edible, some were poisonous. This mix will work well, said Kali, for some goddesses are Ugra, poisonous, and others are Saumya, kind. What kind of goddess are you, Kali? Asked Durga. Definitely Ugra, poisonous. That's why I love snakes, said Kali with a smile. They both laughed. It was time to set up the Yajna Kund. Hreem, the word went. The next root mantra was Hazak Freem. Mushrooms were being consecrated, and the Bija mantras by the two priestesses, Kali and Durga. Their strong voices would break up into strong assonance, and they perfectly pronounced the powerful sounds. The Yajna Kund was vast. It was set up on the top of the mountain Meru, which was at the center of the world. Flames, flames all around. Amidst the smoke, the first goddess to emerge was Dhumavati, the smoky one. She was the grandmother of all goddesses. Kali smiled. Something moved in the sky. It was a message. You will find everything you seek in this yagna, but do ask Dhumavati to lead the mushroom sacrifice. Everything about Dhumavati was grey and decaying.
Well, everything about her was gray and decaying. I love that description there at the end. And this world is great. I love these personalities. You know, what type of goddess are you, Kali? Asked Durga. Definitely Arga, poisonous. That's why I love snakes. She said with a smile. They both laughed. I want to hang out with them. I mean, I think it's probably a little dangerous, but I want to hang out with them. I have an idea that Kali is a goddess, I think. I feel like a female goddess, maybe with the heads around, and a birth and death, almost like an originator and kind of earth goddess. I love them. I love these personified characters. So one of my comments was about the setting. So the way I look at writing is basically, I think an awful lot about the reader. And I basically think to myself that what I'm doing is I'm creating a reader experience. And I've said this, before, but I think it's worth repeating basically, is that the reader does not come to read about an experience. The reader reads to have an experience. So I think that little idea is really so foundational to a lot of the ways I think about writing, because I'm thinking about what experience are they having? And how is it that we, and by trying to understand readers, I'm not thinking of myself as the writer who, I have something to say that everyone else needs to hear and it's so important, right? I try to avoid that person because that person has not helped me write very well in the past. The person who helps me write well is the person who thinks about the reader and understanding that the reader is actually just like me, perceives things just like I do, is influenced by things just like I am. So what happens here, and you have a little bit of trouble maybe because you're dealing with gods essentially that are maybe abstract, or at least the way you understand them is abstract because you haven't gotten things like setting, these other sort of physical characteristics. When something is abstract, it's immaterial. So, but our words basically influence us by being material, by being concrete. So abstractions mean much less to us and affect us much less than concrete things.
Okay.
One of the ways I explained this, I was teaching a class at Stanford, and someone had written a wonderful story about a boy who went to this very famous park in the US, Yosemite, and he was with his father, and they go and they camp at this sort of lower place, but there's a lake up high. And the boy wants to go to the lake up high, and the father doesn't want to because it's getting dark, and the boy insists, please, 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 please. And then they go up and they're walking along this cliff face. And I'll tell you that it's truly like this in Yosemite. You have these sheer rock cliffs, and you might be walking on this little thing with a little shale on it. And as they're walking, the father slips, falls down, and dies. Incredible story. I'm completely hooked. The boy comes back down, builds the camp down the bottom with a tent next to the father's dead body. Are you gripped by that? I'm absolutely gripped.
Yes.
All of it absolutely concrete. Well, he's in the tent, right? We go into this place where he's feeling afraid, and the fear is sort of metaphorically connected to a bear. And I was like, this is the part where I put my little brackets around, and I'm talking to the class, and there was a table and everyone was sitting around. And I said, okay, what would get your attention more if I were to put a metaphor of a bear in the middle of the table, or if we were to have a real bear in the middle of the table? What would gather your attention more so? Everyone agreed it was a bear.
Yeah.
A metaphor of a bear is like, it's an abstraction. It's a fear, a metaphor of a bear. You know, I'm saying we have to write real bears, because for human beings, the things that affect us most deeply are real things. Quite frankly, it's our evolutionary base. Like, if I'm going through the woods and I encounter a bear, I feel a lot of things, you know? But if I'm walking through the woods and I encounter a metaphor of fear, I don't. So that's all a long story to really underscore this really, I think, fundamental principle. When I read the beginning of this story, I just don't even know where I am. And while that can seem small, it's actually incredibly important, because all my life, I have known where I was, right? I mean, so it's a very unusual experience for me to be someplace and not have any idea of where I'm placed. Like when I wake up in my bedroom, I'm in my bedroom. When I'm out in the woods, I'm in the woods. When I'm riding my bike along the bike path, I'm on the bike path. So I know all of those places. I'm within a physical environment. So that's how we are as humans. When we now take ourselves out of a physical environment and put us someplace that's just abstract, we feel lost. It's a long story, but I'm not just saying it to you. I'm saying it for us all. And I'm always telling myself the same story too. We have to try and force ourselves, even if we don't know what that world is like, to make it concrete, which means that we have to take that step to inventing the world. Right? That's very hard for us, you know, because particularly if you're dealing with a story like this, where, you know, let's say it's coming out of, you know, traditional literature and you know, things that you're well aware of in your culture, you haven't been given that. And now you have to, as an author, basically go to this place where, like, I'm taking these stories that are known and I have to make a concrete world out of them. And that concrete world is my invention. It can make us feel like we're pretty highfalutin, right? You know, like, who are we to do that? That can be very difficult. But I'm saying that we have to do it. It's not because I want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to write about real bears. I want to write about metaphorical bears. But I have to do it because of this pesky reader and the way they perceive the world. That was a big speech, but I was kind of fond of it because I love telling that bear story. Let's look at some of these other things. So there's a couple. So the basis of story is essentially this. And I'm not going to, currently in my own work, I am sort of examining whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so let's just say I have complicated feelings about the storytelling art. However, the storytelling art does have certain forms that we've used throughout the millennia. What stories do is they frame something. If they're going to frame something of interest to the reader, they generally frame a conflict. So that means that oppositional forces, one thing and another thing, because human beings care about what's going to happen. We are anxious about the future, and we want to know what it is. This is something that's universally true. So when we frame a conflict, we create the question, what is going to happen? We have this thing, we have this thing. They are in conflict with each other. Basically, who's going to win is the simple way to think of it. So we frame a conflict of two things, and in general, we call these two things protagonist and antagonist. So a protagonist and an antagonist are like the team that you're rooting for and the team that you're not. Okay, so the protagonist has this kind of sense of association. There's like a certain kind of resonance with the audience. So the audience feels themselves to be like the protagonist. And in a sense, because we're not given these universal qualities to the antagonist, the reader feels themselves to not be like the antagonist. I am going to say that these roles could be reversed, and you could create a sense of attachment for the reader for the antagonist, and in a sense against the protagonist if you should choose. These are within the power of the writer. The writer does this. We create the sense of connection, and we also create a sense of disconnection with the other. That is a great power that we should use very wisely and think about a lot. So this is a long way of saying, again, to everyone, basically, that if we want to engage a reader with the story, which is what I want to do. So the way I express this is, if someone, I can't control who opens my story, but if they do, I grab them by the throat, excuse my violent language, and I do not let go. I make them, I make them breathe, like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And I care, and I feel like my life depends on what's going to happen to this protagonist. That's what I want. Because anything less than that means that they might put my book down. And that is the one thing that I absolutely must control about my readers' behavior, that they not put my book down. So here, I mean, I love this opening, but in a short piece, I would say in a short story, in a novel, maybe you can spend time. I don't really think so, because I think in the modern world, people are like, they just want something that makes them feel something so very badly that they don't feel like they have time to waste. But, if you want to take that risk, that's up to you. I would like to engage my reader regardless of the work as quickly as possible. So I would like to frame the conflict first. This, again, is not just for this work, which I love this world. I love it. So I want to take this world that's so wonderful, and I want to bring it up to this level where someone cannot put it down. That's our objective. I mean, you already have the vision. You already have the creative worldview, right? You have all of those things. Now to do the simple things that storytellers and every cricketer knows, create a frame, put a protagonist and antagonist in there, and have them in conflict so the reader says, what's going to happen? Again, for everybody, what happens, though, this is a kind of a larger comment. What we're really dealing with in our writing is ourselves. So what happens, when I say we have to do this, is that we're making this transition from being the writer who is thinking of themselves as the person who wants to say these things to a reader because they want to, the kind of egotistical, place, to a place where they're like, what does my reader want? And what we're going to end up doing is finding a balance between the two, where you get to have your vision, right? This incredible world and these incredible characters and these incredible situations, but they are going to be in the form that the reader wants to read about, which is going to be a conflict that develops over time and results in some kind of conclusion. I'm not saying this lightly. This is an agonizing compromise that we as writers have to make with our readers. It's agonizing to bring these two things together, to say to ourselves, oh boy, I have to write a conflict because my reader needs to read about a conflict or else they won't care. I know. I love to type. I love to think things. I love to imagine things. I don't want to be constrained by this quality, but that's what we're seeking. Then, so I thought, I'm so sorry. I was like, it's like I'm saying all these things as if it's just you. I'm really not. I want you to know I'm not. I'm always, everything I say, I'm always saying to myself to remind myself that I have to do these things. And I'm telling you, I truly suffer. I truly suffer. And I suffer partially because the effectiveness of framing a story between protagonists and antagonists and its ability to manipulate our audience and keep them engaged is truly a large power. And I'm not sure it's a good one. And I'm definitely certain that it's not always used for good. So I make these comments with that a little bit in mind. So, and then my next question is, there's this idea of point of view, which is it works very well with this idea of creating a frame and a protagonist and an antagonist. Basically what point of view does is it aligns the reader with the point of view of one of the characters, sometimes a group, but usually in a short story, just one. So that the reader gets to have the experience that protagonist has as they move through the story. And by sharing that experience, sharing it vicariously, or perhaps the protagonist could be seen as the reader's avatar having the experience, they get to have the experience of the story. And that creates what we like to think of as a kind of deep learning experience. It isn't the learning experience of being told what to think. It's the experience of going through it's the learning of going through an experience and coming, in a sense, to what you believe are your own conclusions. So that's something that you might want to think about bringing to this story. I often, one of my ways of trying to communicate this is to say, whose story is this? Whose story is it? Because we can make a protagonist out of any one of a collection of characters. It's just a question of what we decide. So whose story is it? And the way I answer the question of whose story is it is which character is going to be changed by the experiences that they have in the story. Because a story, I do believe, has to be about a character changing. Because if a character goes through an experience and they do not change, if they are the same at the end as they are at the beginning, then I argue that nothing happened between points A and B. So a story is about something happening, something happening basically means that experiences affect a character, and that effect is understood as character change.
So should we follow the hero's journey? Because hero's journey is generally has this protagonist, antagonist, and then there is character change, and then there's the initiation. And maybe for a mythical kind of a structure, it would work, especially with goddesses and demons and things like that.
Yes. So I think the hero's journey is a way to express basically this verisimilitude of life that's expressed through a story. But I think that following, so hero's journey, I think that's Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell basically applied a kind of analysis. He came up with a sense of analysis and then applied it to a lot of stories, right? And for him, that meant that you had this thing, the initiation, the blah, blah, blah. And he gave them all various names. And there are a lot of people who will take the hero's journey and they will simply write scenes that correspond to the hero's journey. And then they make like movies, Harry Potter is probably a hero's journey. It's not that the form is untrue, basically, but I don't always use, we just come up with words to mean something. I think honestly, I think there's a danger to rewriting the hero's journey all the time without some sense of what we're doing. But I think we have to understand that the hero's journey, or what I think of it as beginning, middle, and end. I don't think of it as a hero's journey, but basically that we have to write something in the beginning that does what the beginning does. What the beginning does is, one, make the reader care about the protagonist by having some kind of sense of universal connection. Usually, we could call it vulnerability, we could call it interior struggle, whatever we want to call it. There's a lot of different names, but basically the beginning makes the reader care, and the beginning makes the reader wonder what's going to happen. And what's going to happen means that we establish the conflict. The middle, I call the duration of struggle, is the character. I think the initiation in Joseph Campbell might be similar to this. Like, I see the transition between the beginning and the middle as being a place where the character makes a commitment to the struggle that they're engaged in. Often that is, I think it's more meeting the mentor, right? It's often meeting the mentor, because what it means is they make a commitment to do something to someone who they care about if they disappoint them. That's why it works dramatically. So I think, like, that's one thing I think about the hero's journey sometimes, is that the hero's journey describes basically something that takes place dramatically that is actually meant to convey a kind of emotion. And so it's one way to dramatize it, but you might have many different ways to dramatize it. And then the middle is the duration of struggle. And then the ending, there's a transition point between the middle and the ending, is the climactic moment, in a sense, where I believe the protagonist should have a choice. That, they shouldn't be scripted to the point of, they're just destined to fail, but that they can choose either to transcend, which is to change, or they can choose to go down with the ship, basically a noble martyrdom at the end. I think that they have, which is kind of tragic in its way, but it's a poignant tragedy because at least they had a choice to do it, as opposed to the way life might actually be, which we don't have a choice. Right.
So actually, the sort of writers who inspired me are like Margaret Atwood and Jeanette Winterson, and also Roberto Calasso's Car, which was on in mythology itself. So for me, that was like when I read it years and years ago. I mean, it was like the ultimate sort of book on Indian mythology. But yes, something like Good Bones by Margaret Atwood or Jeanette Winterson's looking at myth and those sort of writings is what I aspire to write. But I think, yeah, the protagonist, antagonist, all that needs to be clearer, and point of view, setting, basics have to be in place.
I'm trying to think. I might be confusing Jeanette Winterson, who I feel like I've read. I was just confusing with Jeanette Walls, but
Okay.
the you know the I think the thing is we just have this obligation to try and write something that's going to engage our reader. Some of our oldest stories in our mythologies are a combination of histories. They're also, you know, partially origin stories. And I think they are also designed to a degree to mystify, right? I mean, they're myth, but they mystify the audience. You know, they make them, they make their eyes go big, and they're, you know, it's just this larger world. Maybe the trouble is, you know, in those early years, right? When, I mean, I think about, you know, early storytelling before we even had writing. They did have something of a captive audience, right? You know, they had their stories that they told, and there were other storytellers, and they were traveling around, and probably if two storytellers ended up on the same corner, one beat up the other one, right? And then there was just one storyteller, right? So, but today we have so many stories. So it's really a question of getting that, you know, we're really competing with all these other stories. So we can't simply reproduce, you know, the mythological feeling of a story. We have to do something that's a little bit more acutely focused. And actually, I mean, so what's happened is, like, let's say you look at a Hollywood movie. A Hollywood movie is scripted by the beats exactly, and you know, Bollywood movies are the same way. Chinese movies, you know, that everyone knows how to do this. Joseph Campbell was a basis for it, but I don't think people use Joseph Campbell so much anymore. Maybe some writers do that are on the outside, but the professionals in the industry, they know exactly how to write all these things. So it's far honed, and we are competing with Hollywood. Honestly, you know, every writer is competing with every other writer for the reader's time. And so we just have to be as good as we possibly can be. So that's why I say, like, you know, for me, I mean, I recognize this. I'm competing with the best writers I know for the same reader, because there's only so many readers and so much time. We can find our readership, so I don't want to make it too totalizing, but I do also want to beat everybody else, particularly a few people that I can tell you by name. That was a joke. Okay, I better move on to something else. But I think these are good things to think about. So I would just put them in. You have this, you know, your language and this creative world is just incredible. So I don't want to have the job of, like, trying to curtail you, you know, and like put you into some kind of box. I don't want that job. Believe me, I don't. I'm just trying to say that I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong. And I want you to struggle with it, and I want you to find your own way. I would throw out anything that's a script if I were you, because you might write something better than the hero's journey. You know, I don't know what you're going to write. But do include this idea of the reader, right? What is the reader's experience of what I'm writing? And what can their experience even be? Who is the reader? At the end of the day, the reader is not a mind that exists in an abstract universe. At the end of the day, the reader is a human being who lives in the real world and sees real things all the time. What they'd like to do is see real things and have experiences that are more exciting and more profoundly important than the experiences that they're already having. Right?
Mhm.
So just keep that little thing in mind and think about them, because I know you can, right? It's just another question of imagination. It's basically, it's like imagining the two sides, both your vision. Okay, I want to keep that in my mind, but then I also want to, imagine the person who reads the words that I'm putting down on the page, and what do they experience from those words. You're already writing, a fabulous world.
Thank you.
I think you'll struggle with it and you'll find your way. I absolutely do.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. Kavita, am I saying that okay?
Yes, that's correct, Otis. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm just reviewing it a little bit. Okay. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about this work and what you're doing, and then maybe I'll have you read. Whoops, that was okay. That's fine. Maybe after you tell us a little bit about it, I'll have you read from here to the
Okay, sure. Thank you. So, namaste. Thank you, Otis, for doing this time and again. This was my submission for the Shared Roots on Cambodia. And this is actually, so I have previously, you've read them and they've been fiction, but this is a kind of a diary, a travelogue, if you will. And it is an account of my travel with my mother. And every year I take her to a different place. We go to a temple, or in this case, there are more ruins than temples. But yes, she was very excited. But this was our first kind of a foreign sojourn together in the sense of, Cambodia. It's not that far, but still. And it was very exciting. At that point, I think she's 75 now. So this was in 2018. So it wasn't easy, from both our ends, and we pulled it off. Because I was here in DC, she was there in India, and then trying to just go alone, like just with my mom, and it's not a done thing. People are doing it now, but at least in my family, it was not taken very well, because everybody else wants to join. That's the point. So just taking off with your mother is not, it's like, why alone with her? But I did want an experience with her and treat her for her birthday. Cambodia itself was a great, it was a great learning for both of us, both the travel as well as being there, and the shared heritage. So this is a kind of a prologue of how things happened, how we got together, how we convinced others, and my own inner not confusion, but I was feeling a little guilty that I'm saying no to the cousins and friends who wanted to join, and trying to keep it under wraps and trying to arrange for the finances, and So, and I ended before the actual diary starts. So it was a 7 to 8 day sojourn in Saunterings in Angkor Wat and the surroundings. And I just stopped short of describing that. But I wasn't sure because it said 750 words. So I thought I'll just give you the initial, a few paragraphs.
Yeah, it's always something to start with. I think I was actually just talking to someone recently, about, it's nice. We're all just talk, but we have this thing as a sort of object example, and it's just like, it can make us all feel a little safer. We're talking about this little thing here, but we're talking about all these other larger issues. Well, I want to hear a little bit of this, but I want to say initially that what you described to me in its simplest form sounds like a fantastic story.
Okay.
The cousins and the financing, I would throw that out.
Okay.
And I would stick with, just what you told me, just so naturally. You're like, I would try to develop it a little bit, but it's like, you take a trip with your mother every year. You go to temples. So
okay.
And you went to the temples. This is the first foreign travel, but you can wait on that. everything in its time, just everything in its time. That's the travel log is very much already falls into this pattern. So a narrative, the simplest definition of a narrative is a sequence of events. If we keep that in mind, we're going to do great in terms of telling a story. We decide what events to include, and we decide, so there's basically three things that we write. We write things that we write in scenes, which means that we develop them. We write things in summary, which means we compress them. And we write things not at all, and we omit them. Those are our three choices. And we basically just go scene, summary, omitted material, gone, scene, summary, omitted material, etc. And we create a sequence. What you already told me, we naturally sequence things, but when you were explaining the story, you sequenced it and you said, I travel with my mother. We have in the past, we've traveled, she's 75 now, so she was such and such later. Great, all great things. The daughter who travels with their mother to temples is already extremely interesting and sympathetic to me, right? You're already doing so much more than I do with my mother. I feel guilty. I feel like I should be more like you. I feel like I can learn something from your experience. I am 100% in, right? And then you have the mother who I don't know or understand, right? I can understand the daughter some, but I don't understand the mother yet. And I hope to, right? And I hope to learn from the story. What is it that they're seeking to discover, right? About the place and about themselves by going to the place, and about their relationship and all of that. I'm completely in. So it sounds wonderful. I see that I noted here, it seems like you're warming up. This is natural. Most of us actually, our experience with writing is in analysis and in exposition. So we explain a lot, we analyze a lot, we form conclusions a lot. That's like the expectation of the society around us. But for storytelling, storytellers, we're very simple. People think, because we do a very simple thing, which we just write a narrative, which is a sequence of events, deciding what should be expanded, what should be compressed, and what shouldn't be in there at all. Let's hear just a little bit to hear.
Okay. Asking my mother to join me in this adventure was a given. I get my adventurous spirit, the ability to appreciate new cultures, peoples, and mores, the forbearance needed for traveling in areas that might not be running at a pace most of us are used to these days, the love of humanity and planet Earth in all its glory, everything from her. Each time my father was posted to a new border town in India, it was she who would converse with the locals in no time, make our lives more than comfortable, and teach us to respect the alien surroundings and goad us to learn from them. I remember her sitting up late at night to watch all those foreign movies on state television, Doordarshan, and talking to us about them excitedly the next morning. Yeah, I should not use that. Yes, it was a no-brainer. To Cambodia then. I get it now. Yeah, when I read it now, I see it as a reader, and yes, thank you. To Cambodia then, and with my mother. It also helped that Amma mostly, always, gave in to my decisions and did not pose a threat to my authority. I could rely on her to work as a team and to not protest too much if things went wrong.
Yeah, so that little threat to my authority is a great little thing to admit in there, or for you to know yourself, to develop in terms of the character, because that's so for a story to take place, right? Like I said, we have a protagonist. For it to be a story, the character must change. The events that take place, in this case, the traveling with the mom, have to bring this protagonist, who is the author here, to a different place. And that means that we now have a journey. We've gone from A to B. We haven't gone from A to A. A to A is, I will say, a flat line. You know, it's like in the hospital. Doesn't matter. A to B, you know. The beginning here is backstory. So when we say that we're starting a story, this is about the travel with my mother to Cambodia. That starts at a specific time. Again, we go to our reader. Our reader has lived their entire life in time. The reader has lived their entire life in a narrative, which has been a sequence of events in their life. Some of those events they found to be important. Some of them they've summarized. Those were difficult years, you know, or I had fun in graduate school. And then some of them they omit completely, like all the terrible things that we've done, you know, those are gone. So we have those, oh, I was a hero. Those were good times, and oops, you know, gone. So start somewhere. Introduce the conflict, the two things we have to do in the beginning. Introduce what the issue is, the conflict, and make us care about what happens. That basically, sometimes we express that as the external conflict. So, you know, I was sitting in my living room when my neighbor Bob came in, walked over to my desk, and took my computer. There you go. I just started a story. You know, there's a conflict. My computer was everything to me. It was my brother, my confidant, my mother, my sister, my dad, you know, whatever. So now I make you care about my plight of losing the computer. There you go. I just started a story. So do those two things. Without my computer, I felt as if I didn't exist. That's an internal conflict. So we try to present the external conflict and the internal conflict. Then you might do backstory, but I will say, don't do it. Do not do any backstory. I guess I'm in a storytelling mood today, but I had a professor at Stanford named John LaRue. He's written, you know, 18 books or something like that. He had a method, and, you know, and one day I was so frustrated because everyone there was so smart. Everyone was telling me great things to do, but they were all different. And I was just like, and I found John LaRue, and he was a little guy, or I wouldn't have done it. He was a little guy. I grabbed him by his lapels and I pushed him up against the wall. And I said, John, his feet were dangling. I said, tell me something I can really use. And he said, only tell backstory when you absolutely have to.
That's some point to ponder in the sense, when you mean backstory, because I'm starting off with saying, giving the background of how we ended up in Cambodia, you're saying that I shouldn't be saying that?
I'm saying start somewhere. Start somewhere. It's a date in time and space. You're somewhere. You're somewhere, and then you're going to write a sequence of events that go this way.
Okay.
Backstory is anything that takes place before you started your story.
Okay. Okay.
Anything in the backstory, if you're a good writer, which we all aspire to be, if we're a good writer, we don't explain anything, we show it. If there's something relevant in the backstory, we don't put it in backstory because, okay, what's more engaging? We're sitting around a table and there's a bear on the table. Or is it more engaging? We're sitting around the table and I'm telling you the story of when I saw a bear.
True. Yeah, the bear on the table would be frightening, yes.
Bear on the table is more engaging than the story of the bear that happened to me when I was a kid.
Mm.
A story is already a level of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to our harm to abstract beyond that. I think that's just a psychological truism. The story is already abstracted. It's written down in symbolic language. So then to make it not to take away any immediacy is a detriment. Every choice we make in our writing is a risk-benefit ratio. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, okay? Because there's obviously been people who've written backstory. There are people who've written summaries. There's people who've done all sorts of things. But I believe that every writer basically does this. And what happens is we see very successful applications of these things. But believe me, there have been many failures also. But every writer is going to engage in a risk to benefit ratio. So they have to first understand the risks. What's the risk if I write backstory? And I'm going to tell you what the risk is. That's the risk. That's the risk. Because instead of having a bear on the table, I was like, there's a bear on the table. But let's put that aside for a second. In my past, I've seen bears. I was there. There's a bear on the table. So now and then you took them away off the screen and you said, I've seen bears in the past. You might lose the reader. So risk, but then what is the benefit? There might be a benefit. And if the benefit is there, then it might be worth the risk of losing the reader. You may have the reader even more tightly wound around your fingers if you take the risk, but you might lose them. These are the choices we make. You already have such a compelling story to tell. The other thing is, it's just easier to explain. You know?
Yes.
I mean, the mantra, we talked about it last week, but the mantra in every creative writing program is show, don't tell. Show, don't tell is just a shortcut, though, for understanding something important about the reader experience. The reader experiences it in a more engaged fashion if they're witnessing something from which they're taking something. They're coming into the experience to witness, and then they're doing the work of understanding, right? You're above working the strings by showing them the bear, and then there's the cave, and then there's the cliff, and having your character jump off the cliff into the river rather than going into the cave. And the reader figures out, oh, that was smart, because they would have been trapped. Anyway.
A quick question here, Otis. I thank you for what you said, and it all makes sense. But the way the story was going, and I thought I should ask you for advice, is I based it, and I can clarify it if it was not clear from what I sent. I based it in the COVID times, and I tried to juxtapose it constantly with my memories, like of the 7 days. And so 7 days in my balcony, like looking out, nowhere to go, nothing to do, and all the fear of COVID, and just being happy, reminiscing of my travels with my mother, because I wasn't sure if I would be able to meet my parents again, or so there was this real fear of all of us that we had during COVID. So this was the summer of 2020, and I'm reminiscing the past where I traveled, the last trip I did with my mom. So do you think that makes sense, or is that something I should avoid and just keep it linear and just have it real time in 2018 in the travels only?
Kavita, you're walking into one of my most famous depictions. Okay. Is it more interesting to have me here grappling with a bear, or let me for a moment act out reminiscing about the time I grappled with a bear?
Okay. But isn't that the conflict?
Well,
You're right.
I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm done.
True.
I'm just going to say, at your peril. It's a risk-benefit ratio. Is the reader, I think you have a great story to tell about going, I mean, why not just embrace what you have? Why make it all fancy? Why make it all, like once you make it reminiscing, right? Then you're actually just writing thoughts.
Got it.
Here's me having thoughts. Show me the movie, show me the blockbuster movie about a character having thoughts. I don't think I'll see it. So then embrace, this is the thing. We've all grown up in an education system, it seems to me, where what we've been valued for is our ability to think. We've all done it, right? I mean, I have more degrees than God, basically. And it's like, it's all about my ability to think about stuff. But that's not what we're doing in a story. What we're doing in a story is we're dramatizing things. We're actually making a little play happen, or a movie, or whatever. We have characters, and the characters do things, and the reader is an audience that watches it. We just happen to work with words. We could work with film. We could work with music. There's all sorts of ways to tell stories. We're using words. We could have paintings, et cetera, et cetera. So we're using words. And that constricts us in certain ways, but basically we're just showing a story that the audience then appreciates from, and you have a great story to show. I would really try and encourage you just to do it. You already have a travel log. It already begins, it already has a middle, and it already has an end. That's the nice thing about travel logs, right? So my only worry is that you have such a wonderful story to tell that it might be a longer story than you can tell in a short period of time. I can imagine you writing your trip with your mother to Cambodia as a full-length book that I would enjoy reading. And in a full-length book, I would enjoy learning some of this backstory, particularly not in an abstract way. So this is a little bit higher. It's on the same vein, but like a higher level discussion of backstory. So if I'm running a front story where there's a bear, and I go into backstory, I need to also have basically a bear in the backstory too. There's a danger of me shifting from this story to this story, but the same principles apply to backstory as apply to the front story. It must engage. The same principle applies to if we are in one point of view with a character and we shift to another point of view. So if I engaged you with the point of view of this character by illustrating their external struggle and internal struggle, now I have to engage you with this new character by explaining, by putting onto the page their external struggle and internal struggle. Because every time you pull the reader out of something and put them into something else, you have a danger, the risk of losing them. Might there be a benefit? Yes. So, I guess I went into that saying that if you go into a longer work, I would probably love to hear about the earlier travels with the mother to these other temples, right? Particularly as they're germane to what's happening specifically and importantly this time as a difference, not just to fill up pages. So, but if you do that, you need to go back into when you go into the backstory, tell it like a flashback. That's a different, so backstory is everything in the back, but a flashback means that you're actually dramatizing the backstory. And that's where we would want to lean because reader engagement is crucial. There's another, I don't want to make it too complicated, but the other way to look at it is our story should have forward momentum. And then we can interject at times explanation, definitions, even sometimes backstories. We have these backstory elements that I think of as parenthetical. But I think that this is an important principle in how we design our stories. There has to be a forward momentum. If there's no forward momentum and we have a backstory that stops the forward momentum, we lose our reader. So the reader needs to wonder what's going to happen in order for them to tolerate having the story stop. Then the thing that stops the story must elevate the story for the next action of the story. That is a very exacting pattern. It is not the way we write, because the way we write is we think. And we have to train ourselves not to think the way we normally think, just anywhere, everywhere, all at once. We have to think within a sequence of events and understand that what we're depicting in the story is a sequence of events, including forward momentum, raising the stakes sequence of events, let's say a paragraph, forward momentum, raising the stakes. So my example for this one is a story that goes like this. I was out with my buddies and we were riding our bikes. I'm doing a little accent here, like kid accent. We were riding our bikes by this old scary house. I was on my skateboard and Johnny, Billy, and Tommy were on their bicycles. And Tommy says to me, he says, hey, Otis, I dare you to go up and knock on that door. I was like, well, I'll knock on that door. And they said, well, then go do it. And I was like, well, I will do it. And I said, well, why don't you do it then? I'm going to do it. I will do it. I'll do it any day of the week. You mean today? And he says, yeah, today, go do it today. Okay. And I'm like, okay. And then I go up the steps and I look at the door. I bring back my hand and knock on it. Forward momentum. Parenthetical. It was the old McGillicuddy house where last summer 7 people were murdered, including 3 children who were our friends. I drove my fist at the door, but it swung open before I ever hit it. Right? Forward momentum, raise the stakes. Why is it scary to knock on the door? Why is it scary to go into the house? I raise the stakes and then the door opens. The next action. That little model, if we can do that throughout with all of our little interjections and explanations, we are going to write a very compelling story, I believe.
Yes, that sounds fabulous.
Can we do
Hard
it?
work.
Can we do it? No. Can we do it? No. The answer is no, we can't. And what is the problem from doing it? Us. We can't, because we want to write something else. We don't want to write these things that are ratcheted down to basically always enhance the reader experience. We want to say, no, I don't think this time it matters. Or this time I think it would be nice to explain at length, about, the whatever it is, this backstory element that we want to bring in. So, but I think the key to our work is really thinking about that sequence first, making sure that we have that forward momentum, making sure that the reader cares about the character. That's the beginning. And then we proceed with a series of events. A very famous book in the US is A Series of Unfortunate Events by, the guy's actual name is Handler, but he calls himself Lemony Snicket's. It's a kid's book, but it's great. He absolutely understands stories. That's what stories are. A story is a series of unfortunate events. It is not a story is not a series of wonderful events, because wonderful events don't change anybody. So they have to be difficult and they have to force change. And your start about the authoritarianism, the authority, that gives us what John Barth calls it, the unstable ground situation. The protagonist has to come in with an unstable ground situation in order for there to be any change. So we actually, I think this, and I've written this, that basically the story goes from a process of disequilibrium to equilibrium. that's the movement of story. That's a way to express it. I better move on because I'm going to get in big trouble. But
thank you so much.
I look forward to this story. The relationship between the daughter and the mom is always going to be great, you know, because it isn't all happiness and light. It's complex.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
yes. Thank you.
It is every human being's most complex relationship. I mean, I'm writing a character now who is adopted, so he never knew his birth mother, and it's his most complicated relationship.
Thank you. You've been most helpful, Otis G. I'll rework it a bit, and I'll follow some of them are very, very good advice. I'll focus on the relationship and the transformation, you know, and the linear story. Yeah.
The other thing, I use a program called Scrivener, and I've noticed this over time. It's absolutely true of me. I never write chronologically, and I always write something, and then I have to splice it up, and then I put it chronologically, because I know at the end of the day that's important. And I finally have to put a parameter on where's the beginning of the story, right? And where's the end of the story. And then that tells me where everything else goes and whether I can use it or not. Sometimes those things, like you're saying, you know, when you talk about the other temples in a short piece, you might not be able to get to that, or maybe there would be a sentence or two about it, you know. But it's very important developmentally to understanding these two characters. This is not the first time that they've done this, but it is the first time they've gone out of the country to do it. There's a purpose and a reason to this activity. They're going to temples. They're not going to, you know, the fanciest restaurants, or maybe they are too. I hope so, you know. But they're putting some parameters on this, and so clearly that's a very good thing to know and to use as development for what happens between them in this instance. Okay, Abhinav is not here to get me in trouble and give me a stern look. So
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being so patient. Namaste.
Okay, is there anyone else here who I forgot from last week?
Hey Otis, I'm Charan. So I was absent last week. So can you?
Ritran and. Okay, so both of you I had for last week, and okay, let's see. Monocoil.
Yes, that's
yours. Is this your piece? Whose piece is this?
Yes, that is mine.
That's your piece? Okay, great. I did talk about this. How do you say your first name, please?
I'm Srinidhi.
Srinidhi.
Yes.
Okay, Srinidhi. Okay, I'm not going to get that perfectly, but forgive me for that. Okay, Srinidhi. I talked about this piece a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to have you read a little bit.
Definitely. Yes.
I'm going to have you read to here, from the beginning.
From the beginning to that, is it?
Yeah, from up here.
Okay. Pratibha stood leaning against one of the many magnificent pillars in the temple, gazing at nothing in particular. His mind imagining a place hundreds of miles away from his town. Moonlight filled the serene courtyard, illuminating the entire place. Jahni, his mother, was gently humming some prayers and sorting out huge piles of vilva flowers. Pradeep's eyes followed the fumes of the nearly burnt incense stick, which was giving out the perfumed fragrance of sandalwood. Mother, I was wondering if you could tell me something about Arya Desham, he inquired. Jahni looked up, surprised by his son's question. Nevertheless, she answered, even I don't know much, but I can tell you this. When I was younger than you, the kings and the queens, the royals, and sometimes even rich merchants used to wear clothes made of luxurious silk and cotton, woven with the finest of finer threads. They say these clothes were from Arya Desha, a country far away.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I already spoke a little bit about this story because I want to make this point here. Okay, I'm going to cut out magnificent. Gazing at nothing in particular, his mind imagining a palace hundreds of miles away from this town. Moonlight filled the, I'm going to cut out serene, illuminating the entire place. Janavi, his mother, was humming. Okay, so we're talking about starting a story, and we're talking about creating a sense of setting and place and character point of view. And I believe that this first paragraph does that. And so when I read this first paragraph, I was immediately in this space and with this person in the temple, leaning up against the pillar while his mother was humming. I am going to say to everyone, so you don't think that I'm, when I say conflict and this and that you think that you have to have, Tom Cruise exploding a building and flying off and then landing on an alligator. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we want to recognize the reader. The fundamental thing that we know about the reader is this one thing. We can underline it. They want to leave their world, the one that they live in every day, where they have to do dishes and this and that. They want to leave it and they want to go into another world. When we provide that world for them, we've done our first thing that we need to do. They're in a place, they're with a person who is their avatar. They get to safely have the experiences of this person without personally being threatened by them. Wonderful. Pratipa stood leaning against one of the many pillars in the temple, gazing at nothing in particular, his mind imagining a place hundreds of miles away from his town. Moonlight filled the courtyard, illuminating the entire place. Janavi, his mother, was humming some prayers while sorting out huge piles of bilva flowers. Is everyone with me? Please? I don't want to feel alone here. I love that paragraph. It accomplishes the main thing we have to do. I am in. I went from my world to this world. I am committed to be there. I love it there. It's going to become more difficult as time goes on because we need that. I need to know why I'm here. I need to feel why I'm here. I need to feel a sense that I'm also going somewhere. These are important things that I'm not sure that you quite considered 100% yet. Okay, so that's fine. But you've accomplished the first thing. This ability to put me there is the first, essentially for all of us as writers, this is the first standard. Now we have to see where we go, where we rise above this to create those experiences, the dramatic situations that occur that are written and seen have to be good. They have to compete with others, but it's still very much placed in this world. Look at this. Pratipa's eyes followed the fumes of the nearly burnt incense stick, which was giving out the perfume fragrance of sandalwood. I'm telling you, I'm nearly weeping. I wish, and I'm not weeping for good reasons. I'm weeping because I wish I had written that sentence. I wish it were my sentence and not someone else's sentence. It's beautiful. I am completely involved with concrete sensory experience. Damn you. That's my highest praise. My highest praise is damn you. So this is great. Now I'm going to tell you something important. You're writing at a very high level, so I want you to write at a higher level, of course. Do you know why I've cut out magnificent, serene, and gently? What is common about all three of those words? Why do they go into my consciousness like an electric drill with a very blunt bit?
Is it like unnecessary adjectives here that interfere with the reader's point of view?
Right, they're biased words, right? So the writer is putting in these words of bias, which means that they are not removed themselves from the experience so that I can have my own experience. They're telling me how to feel about the space that I'm in. I am going to say, don't do that. Don't come in as the writer telling me how to feel. To feel that it's magnificent pillars, I'll decide for myself if they're magnificent. Or I won't decide at all. Don't control me. I will decide whether the courtyard is serene. I will decide whether she's gently humming or not. Let me do the subjective work. You do the objective work. When you put the objective work on the page, the reader is allowed to experience it. It's like, I do think of it as like weather systems. You know how weather systems work? Weather systems work like this. There's a low pressure system and it welcomes in a high pressure system. Isn't that beautiful? That's what our writing should do too. Our writing should be a low pressure system, and that welcomes the reader into it. It's a subtle point, but one that will raise your level a lot. Now that you're writing like this, your next struggle is to keep us focused on something. I am worried, I have to say, that this is going to be a cerebral story and not an active story. So like when I hear his mind imagining a place hundreds of miles away, I'm like, okay, that looks like you might be going in a direction where we're going to be thinking about someplace we aren't. Is that correct?
Yes.
Aha. So the problem with that is that, again, it's that level of abstraction. The story already, the paragraph you've written is wonderful. But that's one level of abstraction away from real experience for the reader. My real experience is dishes and my house and all of that. But now I've come into this space, into this temple. But you're saying that once I'm in the temple, I'm not going to be in the temple. I'm actually going to be thinking about this other place. That's a second degree of abstraction. So now I'm actually in the temple thinking about a bear. This is me in the temple thinking about a bear. It's the same thing. So I feel so like, even though you've written so concretely, you, as talented as you are like the rest of us, thank goodness, and you want to write about ideas and thinking. I think that I'm going to say to everyone, this is very common amongst us writers, because when we're writing, we often think of ourselves writing as thinking. So we're already in the mind of like, here I am thinking, and I'm typing. I will tell you something. When I write, I don't write that way anymore. When I write, I'm imagining the world. That comes from a long time of typing, so that's something to develop, but I want to push you towards that. Don't write thinking. Don't write ideas. Write a sequence of events. Concrete events, just like this one. This is a concrete event in this first paragraph. And even the second, it's a concrete event. He's standing there, not thinking about anything, gazing off into the distance while his mother's humming, and there's the fragrance of the sandalwood. Now what happens? The next event. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
It's a wonderful beginning. You're writing, to me, gorgeous sentences. They're filled with these sensory details. You, like the rest of us, thank goodness, still have the problem of thinking. Okay. Thinking is a big problem for us as writers. I have someone that I'm working with, and I'm always saying, don't write ideas. But basically I do mean don't write thinking. Don't write thinking. There are times, but well, I'm not going to get into that complex thing right now, but I really look forward to seeing where this story goes. This is a very, very strong start. And then Sri Charan, let me talk about yours. And how we 7:30, 8:30, 9:30. So we're going to move along here. Do you have any questions?
You asked me?
Yeah.
Yes, there was one. Okay, you underlined 7 C's. I mean, you put a question mark near that. So is there any problem with that?
Oh, that's tiny. It's a micro comment, but I was just wondering if, so I don't know what time period you're dealing with here.
Okay. 7 C's is a very common colloquial terms in Indian languages. 7 C's is used to indicate large distances. So.
Okay. I just didn't know what the time period was, because when I guess I think of 7 Seas as being, an expression of all the oceans, which to me means, a kind of a knowledge of the entire world. And I didn't know if that perception would have existed in the time that this was written. So the time period that this is supposed to be taking place, but this could be modern as far as I know. I don't know what the time period is.
It's set in the 12th century, 11th century.
So if it's set in the 11th century, then I don't know. 7 Seas in my colloquialism means basically all the oceans of the world. So I think it's maybe just a.
Yes.
What is that? It's an issue of idioms, but it's tiny, a tiny issue.
Yes.
Okay, I better move on to Sri Charan, but thank you for this work.
Thanks so much.
Sri Charan, where is your work? Where is it?
How the tables turned.
Thank you. Didn't you write a story about someone on the beach and they wake up at some time? They're like, did you write that story?
Yeah, it was a travelogue. Yeah, it was me.
See, I cannot remember people's names, but I hardly ever forget a story. It's like the way my mind works at this point. This sort of reminded me of that. Okay, yeah, right. Let's see. Okay, I remember where I'm at. Let's have you read up to here.
Okay, sure. I do not know where I am. Can anyone hear? It was the same again. No answer came from his microphone, and only God knows how many times Shiva had tried to reach his station. It could be the least of his problems when he had no idea where he had woken this morning. You knew you were not in Bangalore when the sea came to welcome you the moment you opened your eyes. And it was hot. Too hot. Not the cool and happy climate he was used to. Work, you piece of shit, work, he said to his transmitter. Only an incomprehensible noise came, as if the world around him was depleted of all the disturbance by his stupid microphone. Oh, okay. It looked calm and lifeless, like some desert. Even the sand on the shore turned the little breeze into an airy whisper. It was a dream. It has to be a dream. How else could he explain having fallen asleep in his car and then waking up in a seashore desert?
Okay, thank you. So, and then he's in his car, but is he in the trunk?
Drunk?
Drunk?
No, he just slept in his car and woke up on a beach.
Right, but towards the end, don't we have like we have some maybe dog people? Tell us a little about what you're planning for this story.
Yeah, okay, it was kind of a time travel story. So our protagonist just wakes up in a futuristic society where the dogs had taken control, and then he doesn't know how to get out of this area and to his past time. So it was the story how he had to go out to his time.
Okay, and let me ask you: do you have an idea of how this happened?
What?
Do you know how it happened?
No, it just happened.
Okay, so this story, as it's starting, have you ever seen Planet of the Apes?
No, I knew it was a classic, but I did not really.
Yeah, the original one. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So this reminded me a little bit of it because what happens, it has Charlton Heston in it, I think. So he's famous in the US for his love of guns. He joined the NRA later, and he said, "Take it from my cold, dead hands." Anyway, Charlton Heston, famous actor. He is an astronaut. And I think the opening scene is the pod lands in the ocean, and then it washes up to shore, and they open it up, and it's like they're on another planet, right?
Okay.
And so there's a sense of reason as to something has occurred. The rocket is gone, and at the end of the movie, am I spoiling it for anybody? At the end of the movie, they are trying to escape. You know, the apes are in charge of everything, and humans are corralled as animals and treated horribly. But they're like this crazy world. They finally escape and they run down the beach. And what do they see? The Statue of Liberty rising partially from the sand.
Yeah, I had seen that scene in YouTube. I think.
And then and you see what they realize? They realize they are home. Amazing. It really got me when I was a kid. But to have an idea, you know, there's something so what happens, so going back to the idea of narrative, right? Narrative is a sequence of events. It's very often abused, let's face it, but basically we create this thing that's called a narrative logic, right? Narrative logic is not the same as science. So it doesn't mean that everything is explained, but in the narrative logic of Planet of the Apes, it basically holds. The narrative logic is that they took this flight, somehow were lost in time. We don't know how, but then they landed back on their same planet. That makes narrative logic, cause and effect. It's not truth by any means. And we do a lot of things with cause and effect, like, okay, Harry Potter has to, you know, pass through a wall. Narrative logic tells us he casts a spell and then he goes through the wall. Cause and effect, right? That's narrative logic. It's important for you to have it.
Okay.
Even though it is our invention, it's still, so it's like this funny thing that like we can't write anything we want. We have to write things that kind of make sense. And basically, I think that, I'm not sure about this, someone smarter than me could tell you, but like the basic parameter is that you do have this idea of cause and effect. We see that with, you know, superheroes, right? Why is Superman so strong? Because he came from Krypton, right? That cause and effect.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how we work it out, but it somehow worked out. In Planet of the Apes, the cause is only revealed at the end. We're just caught up in the action, and then we realize what caused the action, and that makes a comment on the experience that we've had, which is that this is what the world has turned into.
So what's the cause in the Planet of the Apes, though?
What's the what?
What's the cause in the Planet of the Apes?
No, the cause is how do they end up on the planet, and then what we understand is that the planet is the result of whatever it was that they missed, right? They left the planet and it was like this. Human beings were in charge, and then everything that they missed in terms of time made the Planet of the Apes, and that's what we discover. So it's a comment on that. We've only experienced the Planet of the Apes, the result, but we understand that somehow there was a human cause.
Okay. And in the second movie, the cause is shown to be some disease which wiped out the dogs and cats. And so they are taking apes as the pets, and then the apes become sentient.
Right. And so that's the modern take of it. And actually that's kind of a prequel. So we had Charlton Heston leaves, and then we have this story in the meantime. It's during this period, basically coming up with an explanation of how it occurred. Right. And then, also a good movie, I thought. So, I mean, Shutran, I love how you go for it with your stories. You definitely, I mean, I know, I can tell that you're like driven by your passion. You start imagining these things and you just go and you type it. And I think that is great. So don't lose that. But when you come back to it, and also, I mean, I think for you have no trouble with your imagination, and you have no trouble creating the dramatic scenes that you want to write. You're great at that. What you might need to work on is really thinking about the structure of your story in total, and then writing all the way from A to B to make the whole thing happen, not to maybe just follow your whim of the day and be like, oh, okay, you start off. I mean, I definitely work like this. I will follow a rabbit into a hole and I'll just go wherever I go. I don't care. Let's just keep typing. I really enjoy that.
Okay. So how I approach is like, first I assume a series of scenes and then I connect them.
Right. So what we want to think about is basically the structure of story is going to be this. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Everything is going to be constructed out of scenes, which are things that are expanded because they have dramatic importance in terms of the movement of the story. Summaries, because we want to compress and diminish their importance, but we still have to write them well. And then things that we leave out altogether because they're not part of the story, that move us from A to B, which is about a character change. And I think that, to me, this story, I like that you're interested in it. I think it's been handled. You have to be, if you're going to write a sci-fi, you have to really dedicate yourself, because there are people who really are, they don't do it as a whim. They're really investigating the science. They're building on things. Probably no one here can remember Andromeda Strain, which was also about a sort of genetic mutation in a disease. It's great stuff. I think you wrote the story about the bar that was up in the trees. Remember the boy that was walking along?
Yeah, some tavern. It was a tavern. Yeah.
I want to see you finish something, Shutran, and I want to see you finish it and work on it until you make something that you feel is publishable, and then I want you to send it out.
Yeah, I was working on a draft. So I did not begin it yet, but I was arranging the sequence as you told. I was sequencing the scenes there.
Okay. You don't have to get defensive. Don't get defensive. No,
No, not defensive. Like I'm telling.
I know. I was joking. I was always joking, like, don't get defensive. It's basically saying that you are defensive. So it was my sense of humor. Sorry. But like for me, I love that story, and because it was an environment that I'd never seen before. Whereas this, I feel like I have seen it, as I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I think for every writer, when we're making our choices about what to write, I think we should go to our strengths. You know, what we do basically as writers is we exaggerate our strengths and we try to hide our weaknesses. So whatever we're not good at, we try not to include that. We don't do it. Let's say I can't write relationships. Okay, no relationships. You know, or whatever it is. Like my strength, I think, was always going interior to psychology. So that's what I sort of focused on. You have this incredible imaginative gift. I would use it. You know, these incredible worlds. You know, Sweta has that also. You know, these incredible worlds that you can put on the page. So that's enhance that gift, but then do the things that you have to do to draw us through a story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I appreciate your style.
Yeah, thanks.
I think I have only 2 other things for today. Am I missing anybody? Pranshu, I talked about your piece last week, right?
Yes, we did. Yes.
Okay, and I have 2 pieces. I think I have Abhinav's daughter, and she's not here, and then I have another piece by Vandana, and I don't think she's here. So I think that might be it for today. Rohini, I have nothing from you. I don't know why.
I haven't written any. I'm working on the first piece I sent you.
You don't have to be defensive, Rohini. You don't have to be defensive.
No, that's in final draft, the novel. So I'm not working on anything else.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you all for being here and tolerating all my shenanigans. And I really cut loose today because Abhinav was not here reining me in as he always does.
Thank you, Otis. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.